Being chosen has never been about being popular. It has always been about being different. When you are chosen, you carry a distinction that cannot be hidden, even when you try to blend in. There is something in your walk, your mindset, your discipline, and your convictions that sets you apart, and that difference unsettles people who have learned to survive by conformity. The hatred you encounter is not a reaction to weakness. It is a response to strength that refuses to fit into familiar patterns. Most people find comfort in sameness. They feel safe when everyone around them thinks the same, speaks the same, and moves the same way. But a chosen one disrupts that sense of safety without even trying. You don't have to announce your values for people to sense them. You don't have to explain your purpose for others to feel challenged by it. Your presence alone questions the systems they rely on and the compromises they have accepted. That silent confrontation makes people defensive. Difference has a way of exposing what people would rather keep hidden. When you choose integrity in a world that rewards shortcuts, it highlights the shortcuts others have taken. When you remain disciplined while others drift, it reveals the cost of their distractions. When you stay focused on purpose instead of popularity, it forces people to face the truth that they traded destiny for comfort. That exposure feels like judgment to those who are not ready to change. This is why chosen ones are often misunderstood. People assign negative labels to what they don't understand because labeling gives them a sense of control. Confidence becomes arrogance. Boundaries become pride. Silence becomes superiority. In reality, what they are reacting to is your refusal to dilute yourself to be accepted. You are not loud about who you are, but you are solid, and solidity makes instability nervous. Chosen ones also disturb the illusion that excuses are valid. Your consistency challenges the stories people tell themselves about why they couldn't do better, be better, or choose differently. When you rise without cheating the process, it proves that growth was possible all along. That truth is uncomfortable because it removes the shelter of excuses and places responsibility back where it belongs. What intensifies the hatred is that chosen ones often come from the same environments as those who criticize them. You shared the same limitations, faced the same pressures, and walked through the same storms. Yet you chose discipline over comfort, obedience over convenience, and growth over familiarity. Your decision to rise becomes a mirror that reflects what others chose not to do. Instead of celebrating your courage, they resent the reminder. Difference also requires courage, and courage is rare. When people see you stand firm under pressure, refuse to compromise under temptation, and continue forward despite resistance, it confronts their fear. Fear does not like to be exposed. It lashes out, criticizes, and attacks anything that threatens its dominance. So the hatred is often fear disguised as judgment. Chosen ones are not designed to shrink themselves to make others comfortable. You were set apart to bring clarity where there is confusion, light where there is darkness, and order where there is chaos. That assignment requires distinction, and distinction always comes with a cost. But understand this, the same difference that attracts resistance is the difference that gives you influence. The very thing they criticize is the thing that qualifies you to lead, to heal, and to transform spaces that have been stagnant for far too long. Growth has a way of speaking before you ever open your mouth. When you begin to rise, heal, and mature, it sends a silent message into every room you enter. That message is not one of superiority, but it is one of change. And change makes people uncomfortable who have learned to live with stagnation. Your growth becomes a living reminder that remaining the same was never the only option. When you choose to evolve, you disrupt the comfort of people who settled. They may have once dreamed, once believed, once prayed for more, but somewhere along the journey they made peace with less. Your progress forces them to confront the moment they stopped trying. Instead of revisiting that decision, many choose the easier path, criticizing the one who kept going. It is less painful to attack your growth than to examine their own surrender. Healing is especially confronting. When you forgive, set boundaries, and refuse to stay wounded, it exposes unresolved pain in others. Your emotional stability highlights their chaos. Your calm reveals their inner storms. And rather than admitting they need healing too, some will accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or acting different. In truth, you did change. You stopped bleeding in places where they still do. Growth also removes shared language. Conversations that once bonded you no longer fit. What used to excite you no longer fulfills you. You begin to value peace over drama, purpose over pleasure, and depth over noise. To those who have not grown, this shift feels like rejection. They interpret your evolution as abandonment, even though your intention was alignment, not separation. There is also a spiritual tension in growth. When you elevate your standards, your presence challenges environments that survive on compromise. You don't preach at people, but your choices preach loudly. You don't condemn, but your consistency convicts. That conviction can either inspire transformation or provoke resentment. Sadly, many choose resentment because it allows them to remain unchanged. The most painful reactions often come from people who benefited from your brokenness. When you lacked confidence, they felt needed. When you doubted yourself, they felt superior. When you overgave, they felt powerful. But growth shifts those dynamics. Boundaries replace access. Wisdom replaces impulsiveness. Strength replaces dependency. And not everyone is comfortable losing control over the version of you they once managed. Your growth also dismantles hierarchy. People who once felt ahead of you may feel threatened when you catch up or surpass them. Instead of celebrating your progress, they question your motives, minimize your achievements, or remind you of who you used to be. This is not because you changed too fast. It is because they expected you to stay behind. What many don't realize is that growth is not loud. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. It simply shows up consistent, disciplined, and focused. And that quiet strength unsettles people who rely on noise to feel important. Your silence speaks volumes. Your progress exposes patterns. Your stability reveals imbalance. But growth is not betrayal. Choosing to rise is not an attack on those who stayed. It is an act of obedience to who you were becoming. You are not responsible for how others respond to your transformation. You are only responsible for honoring the process that saved you from becoming who you were never meant to be. When your growth exposes stagnation, it reveals a choice. People can either grow with you or distance themselves from the mirror you represent. And while that separation may be painful, it is often necessary. Growth does not destroy relationships. It reveals which ones were rooted in purpose and which ones were rooted in convenience. It is often assumed that opposition will come from strangers, from people who never knew your heart or witnessed your journey. But the most intense resistance usually rises from familiar faces, from those who watched you struggle, prayed with you in your low seasons, and stood close enough to know your vulnerabilities. Their proximity gives their criticism more weight, and their disappointment cuts deeper, not because they know you better, but because they expected you to remain who you were. Familiar people remember the version of you that needed help, validation, and approval. They grew comfortable with that version because it placed them in a position of influence. Your questions made them feel wise. Your weakness made them feel strong. Your uncertainty gave them a role in your life. But transformation rearranges those roles. When you gain clarity, confidence, and direction, the dynamic shifts, and not everyone is willing to adjust. Some people were only assigned to a season, not a lifetime. They were meant to support you in survival, not in success. When you begin to rise, they struggle to celebrate what they were never prepared to walk with. Your growth forces them to confront the truth that they were comfortable with you as long as you didn't outgrow the environment you shared. Success exposes the limits of their support. There is also an unspoken expectation among familiar people that loyalty means sameness. They assume that because you came from the same background, you should maintain the same mindset. When you choose differently, it feels like a betrayal to them. They interpret your evolution as disloyalty, even though loyalty was never meant to require self-denial. You can honor where you came from without remaining bound to it. What makes familiar resistance so painful is the element of entitlement. Some believe they deserve access to your life because of shared history. They feel entitled to your time, your energy, and your decisions. When you begin to set boundaries, they label you as distant, proud, or ungrateful. But boundaries are not rejection, they are protection. Growth requires guarding what you are building. Familiar faces also know where to strike. They remember your mistakes, your failures, and your fears. When they feel threatened by your progress, they may weaponize your past, reminding you of who you used to be as a way to keep you from embracing who you are becoming. This is not accountability. It is insecurity disguised as concern. Sometimes the resistance comes from comparison. When someone watched you struggle and assumed they would always be ahead, your rise disrupts their sense of identity. Your progress challenges the narrative they built about themselves. Instead of reevaluating their own path, they attempt to pull you back into the role that made them comfortable. They are not angry at you, they are afraid of what your growth says about them. There is also grief involved. Familiar people mourn the loss of access to the old you. They miss the version that overextended, overexplained, and overgave. They miss the predictability of your presence. Growth introduces unpredictability because you no longer move from obligation, but from alignment. That shift feels like abandonment to those who benefited from your availability. But resistance from familiar faces does not mean you are wrong. It often means you are changing in ways that require others to change too. Not everyone is willing to do that work. Some will choose distance over development. And while that separation can be painful, it is sometimes necessary to protect the purpose unfolding in your life. Familiar resistance teaches discernment. It reveals who supports your healing and who preferred your brokenness. It clarifies who is committed to your becoming and who was only comfortable with your need. And once that clarity comes, you are free to move forward without carrying the weight of expectations that were never aligned with your future. Isolation is one of the most misunderstood seasons in the life of a chosen one. It feels like abandonment, like punishment, like something has gone wrong. The silence grows loud, familiar voices fade, and the support you once relied on seems to disappear without explanation. But isolation is not a sign of failure. It is often a sign of preparation. It is the space where strength is formed without distraction and identity is clarified without interference. When everything around you is quiet, you are forced to confront yourself. There are no crowds to impress, no opinions to lean on, and no noise to hide behind. In that stillness, your motives are refined. You begin to understand why you do what you do, not for applause, not for approval, but because it is aligned with who you are becoming. Isolation strips away performative faith and replaces it with conviction. This season also teaches you to hear clearly. When too many voices surround you, discernment becomes difficult. Everyone has advice, opinions, and expectations. Isolation reduces the noise so you can recognize direction without confusion. You learn the difference between impulse and instruction, between emotion and purpose. What feels like loneliness is often clarity taking shape. Isolation builds resilience in ways comfort never could. When you stand alone, you discover what you truly believe. You learn how to self-regulate, how to encourage yourself, and how to keep moving without external validation. This is where endurance is born. If you can remain consistent without recognition, you are being trained for assignments that cannot rely on applause to survive. Many mistake isolation for rejection, but it is often protection. Certain relationships cannot survive your next level because they would distract, dilute, or derail you. Separation prevents unnecessary battles, comparisons, and influences that would weaken your focus. What feels like loss is often space being created for something more aligned. Isolation also exposes dependency. When the usual sources of comfort are removed, you see what you leaned on instead of growing through. This is not meant to shame you, but to strengthen you. Independence does not mean you no longer need others. It means you are no longer controlled by them. You learn to walk with people without being carried by them. There is a sacred transformation that happens in isolation. You confront fears you avoided, heal wounds you ignored, and break patterns you once repeated unconsciously. Without distractions, excuses lose their power. You begin to take responsibility for your reactions, your decisions, and your future. This is where maturity deepens. Isolation also prepares you for leadership. Those who cannot stand alone will crumble under pressure. When crowds leave, criticism rises, or loyalty fades. The strength you built in isolation keeps you grounded. You are no longer shaken by absence because you learned how to remain stable without constant affirmation. It is important to understand that isolation has a time limit. It is a season, not a sentence. Its purpose is refinement, not removal. When the work is complete, connection returns, but differently. You emerge with clearer boundaries, deeper wisdom, and a stronger sense of self. You choose relationships from alignment, not need. If you find yourself in isolation, resist the urge to rush out of it. Do not fill the silence just to avoid discomfort. There is something being developed in you that requires stillness. What feels like separation is often alignment in progress, and when the season shifts, you will realize that the solitude did not weaken you. It prepared you to stand with strength where you once would have fallen. Criticism often arrives disguised as concern, opinion, or even advice, but its true purpose is revealed by the timing. It shows up when you are making progress, not when you are standing still. When you begin to walk in clarity, confidence, and direction, the noise increases. This is not coincidence. Resistance is rarely provoked by complacency. It is triggered by movement. The very presence of criticism can be an indication that something meaningful is unfolding in your life. People rarely attack what has no value. No one guards an empty field or challenges a path that leads nowhere. Criticism follows potential because potential threatens comfort. When you step into purpose, you interrupt routines and expose systems that depend on people staying silent, small, or uncertain. The pushback is often evidence that you are touching something significant. Misunderstanding is another form of confirmation. When your intentions are pure but your actions are questioned, it reveals that you have moved beyond familiar categories. You no longer fit neatly into the expectations people built for you. This shift creates discomfort, and discomfort looks for an outlet. Rather than adjusting their perspective, some choose to distort your motives. Criticism also reveals discernment gaps. Not everyone has the capacity to recognize what you are building because they cannot see beyond their own limitations. They interpret your faith as recklessness, your patience as passivity, and your boundaries as arrogance. But clarity does not require consensus. You are not obligated to shrink your vision to fit the understanding of those who are unwilling to grow. There is also a refining purpose in criticism. criticism. It forces you to examine your foundation. When attacks come, you learn whether you are rooted in approval or conviction. If your confidence collapses under criticism, it reveals an unhealthy dependence on validation. But when you remain steady, you discover that your identity is anchored deeper than opinion. Criticism tests obedience. It challenges you to continue forward without applause. It dares you to trust what you know even when voices rise against it. This is where many retreat, not because they lack ability, but because they fear rejection. Yet those who persist through criticism often find themselves strengthened, clarified, and more focused than before. Some criticism is not meant to stop you, but to sharpen you. It reveals blind spots, strengthens discipline, and deepens wisdom. When filtered correctly, opposition can become instruction. The key is discernment, knowing what to discard and what to refine. Not every voice deserves your attention, but every experience can serve your growth if handled with maturity. What makes criticism confusing is that it sometimes comes from unexpected sources. Support fades, loyalty shifts, and familiar voices turn skeptical. But this shift is not always betrayal. Sometimes it is confirmation that you are no longer operating at the level where their approval matters. Growth changes the audience. Criticism also exposes fear in others. When people see you move boldly, it confronts their hesitation. Instead of facing their fear, they project it onto you. They question your timing, your readiness, and your choices, not because you are wrong, but because your courage highlights their reluctance. When criticism rises, resist the urge to defend yourself. Constant defense drains energy that should be invested in progress. Results speak louder than explanations. Consistency silences confusion. Over time, truth reveals itself without your intervention. If you are being criticized while moving with integrity, purpose, and discipline, do not assume you are off course. Sometimes criticism is not a warning. It is confirmation. It is the noise that accompanies growth, the friction that proves movement, and the resistance that signals you are walking into territory that requires courage. There comes a moment in every chosen life when the desire to be liked must surrender to the responsibility to be effective. Approval feels good, but it is unreliable. It shifts with opinion, convenience, and comfort. Effectiveness, on the other hand, is rooted in purpose. It demands obedience over popularity and results over recognition. Those who are chosen learn early that being liked can become a distraction if it compromises the assignment. The need for approval often tempts people to dilute their message. They soften truth to avoid offense, lower standards to maintain access, and silence conviction to preserve relationships. But effectiveness requires clarity, and clarity is not always comfortable. When you walk in purpose, you will inevitably say and do things that challenge others. If you live to be liked, you will hesitate. If you live to be effective, you will act with courage. Being effective also means making decisions that are misunderstood. There will be moments when people question your choices because they cannot see the full picture. They judge based on surface level information while you move according to deeper insight. Effectiveness requires trusting direction, even when explanation is difficult. Not everyone needs to understand what you are building in order for it to matter. Chosen ones are often placed in positions that require firmness. They must confront cycles, disrupt patterns, and challenge behaviors that have been normalized for too long. This kind of work attracts resistance because it threatens comfort. People may label you as harsh, distant, or uncompromising, but what they call harshness is often just consistency. What they call distance is often focus. What they call uncompromising is often integrity. Effectiveness also demands boundaries. You cannot carry every opinion, meet every expectation, or maintain every connection. Energy is finite, and purpose requires intentional investment. Those who aim to be liked often overextend themselves, leaving little strength for what truly matters. Those who aim to be effective learn to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Another challenge is timing. Being effective means moving when it is time, not when it is popular. Many wait for consensus before acting, but purpose rarely moves with the crowd. It requires initiative. It requires stepping forward before the path is clear. Those who wait to be liked often miss the moment where effectiveness was required. Effectiveness also reframes rejection. When approval is no longer the goal, rejection loses its power. It becomes information, not identity. You begin to understand that resistance does not define you, it refines you. When people withdraw support, you no longer chase it. You adjust your focus and continue forward. Chosen ones must also accept solitude as part of effectiveness. Leaders often stand alone before others follow. The pressure to conform is strong, but conformity weakens impact. You cannot break cycles while clinging to acceptance from those benefiting from them. Effectiveness requires strength to stand firm while others question your resolve. In time, effectiveness produces results that approval never could. Lives change, systems shift, paths open for others to follow. And while being liked offers temporary comfort, effectiveness leaves lasting impact. When the assignment is complete, it will not matter how many approved of you. What will matter is whether you remain faithful to what you were called to do, even when it costs you popularity.